Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Diplomatic Enclave. I am your host Khalid. As you know, our show consists of interviews with different personalities like ambassadors, like heads of different organizations. We recently interviewed an exclusive with the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency as well. Today also it's a bit off the grid, let's put it that way. The personality who I'm going to interview this time is a sports personality. No, she does not play the sports, but she is a sports historian, and she's got a long history as far as sports is concerned because she is the granddaughter of the legendary Australian sportsman Bill Ponsford. Also, she's been chronicling different aspects of the history of sports in the 1930s through different books. Her second book is about to be published. Her first book has already been published, in which she was the principal photographer. She's also done a thesis, has recently become a PhD doctor from the university in Australia. Let me introduce you to her. Her name is Megan Ponsford. Megan, thank you very much to have joined us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Megan, the last time I met you was in 2015. You had come here and you were in awe when you had come to Islamabad. I still remember I was interviewing different ambassadors because there was a cricket tournament between different embassies that was going on, and you were representing Australia at that time. Since then and now, you're back to Pakistan, and as you told me before the show, this is not going to be your last visit to Pakistan. What attracts you to Pakistan?
Well, first of all, can I just say I'm still in awe. You said I was in awe 3 years ago, but I'm still in awe. I absolutely love this country. It's been an absolute pleasure visiting here 3 years ago and having the opportunity to come back now. This time I'm travelling with a group of cricketers, Australian 11, made up of some AFP members, Australian Federal Police members, who have previously lived here. And I'm kind of tacking on the team as a support, I guess. And I'm also hoping to continue my research here because I found I hadn't yet completed my doctorate when I was last here, and I found sort of the missing key pieces to the story of my research in Pakistan.
All right, when you talk about the key pieces of your story of research in Pakistan, what does that entail? What does that include? Tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go towards your first book.
Look, I really think the key pieces of research that I located here was I managed to speak to children of my team of cricketers who toured here in 1935. So I met the children of the local players, and I really I had an Australian angle, and obviously I can't speak from a Pakistani angle. It's not culturally appropriate for me to do so, but it was just so interesting to speak to the family members of the players that played here in 1935, and they'd lovingly kept photograph albums and manuscripts and letters, so there was just so much information that I found here. And because a lot of my thesis was based on pictorial records of the tour, it was so interesting to have photographs that were taken by the Indian team rather than from an Australian angle. So it really kind of balanced the whole thesis out. And that was really the last research I did. Then I went home and I wrote 100,000 words.
Speaking of collecting research through pictures, you are a photographer as well. We'll come to that aspect of your personality as well. But before that, you are the granddaughter of a legend, Bill Ponsford. You're also, your great uncle
yes.
also was a cricketer, not as well known as Bill Ponsford, but if I'm not wrong, his name was Tom Leather.
That's correct.
He also toured India way back in the 1930s.
Yeah. Do you want me to explain the story about that? Okay.
No, but before we come to that aspect of that story, being a kid, what do you recollect from your parents or your grandparents or your granduncle as far as the sports of cricket is concerned?
I grew up being taken to test matches, being taken to football matches, frequently visiting the Melbourne Cricket Ground. We lived in the country and we had, practice nets around our house, and there was always sporting paraphernalia, and sport was a big part of my childhood, definitely a big part of my childhood. We lived in the country, about an hour's drive from Melbourne, and my grandfather and his wife lived in Melbourne. and she died in 1977, and at that stage she came to live with my family. So I was 10 years of age at the time, so I had a fabulous 15 years kind of living with him, which was fabulous.
All right. Was those 15 years very important in your nurturing as a sports journalist or a sports historian?
Oh, absolutely, without doubt. I mean, he wasn't a great reminiscer, but once you started him up, you'd draw stories out that, fascinating stories, which I'm so glad I had the opportunity to kind of unearth them, because he passed away a long time ago now, so sort of a bit of a lost history, I guess.
The connection that you began and then connected or kind of concentrated upon with your grandfather during those 15 years that the both of you talked together and discussed this sport of cricket and its different variations and how it evolved from that period in the 1930s to date. What were the crucial elements that you learned, that you embedded in your book?
Well, I mean, he was a pretty conservative old gentleman by the time he came to live with us, and that was when World Series cricket was just starting up. And he was a traditionalist. There was some, I think he felt it was inevitable that the game was going to change, and I think he saw it being a positive move, but there was that old yearning for the past as well.
When you talk of the yearning for the past, what do you mean exactly? I'd really like to kind of delve a little bit inside
Yes.
of the sport.
Oh, look, I mean, as you know, Kerry Packer completely changed the game. It being from a 5-day game to a 1-day game to wearing colours to being played under lights. It became with franchise teams, etc., etc. And I just think as a elderly gentleman, he really looked back on things like touring with the boys when things weren't televised on television the whole time. I think it really was just looking back at tradition and what the game used to be. But I guess when I'm that age, I'm going to be exactly the same. Really, I think it's just inevitable with people ageing that they look back romantically on the past.
When you talk to him about the bonding that he had with his team players as well as the friendship that he developed with the then Indian players, and of course those at that time the subcontinent was one and then it divided into Pakistan and India. So how fondly did he recall his friendship with his teammates and with the people from the sea?
It was my great uncle who toured India in 35-36, but that's a big part of my research, is that the Australian team was here in 1935-36 to prepare an official Indian team for a test encounter in Britain in 1936. So the Australian team came here to help prepare the departing team. And of course, politically, it was very important that the Indians weren't disgraced on the field when they went to Britain. So there was a lot of definitely camaraderie between team members, but there was also camaraderie with the opposition team as well. And I've got fabulous I know we're going back to photography, but I've got fabulous photographs of both teams dining together and that kind of thing. And it seemed to be very much a kind of a goodwill aspect to the tour. And I think that's why I'm so interested in coming back 70 years later and continuing down that line of goodwill between Australian team and local teams.
Tell me about the goodwill, the camaraderie between different teams of different countries, whether it be Australia and Pakistan, or Britain and Pakistan, or different other countries that enjoy sporting relations together. Does a sport like cricket, that is a gentleman's game, it has always been, promote that, in your point of view?
Look, it's very hard. That's a really loaded question, I must say. I mean, as you know, there's been a lot of bad will on the cricket pitch between competing teams. I think the ethos of cricket administration is that international teams should encourage goodwill, but there are always sort of unpleasant incidents that have occurred, especially in recent years, which didn't happen in the past.
Exactly. I mean, in the 1930s, being a sports historian, did you find any such incidents that were narrated to you as far as difference of opinion or differences as such between teams was concerned while touring?
I think at the time there was a lot of disunity within the Indian team, but you'd know far more about this than I would. But there was communal kind of issues, etc., etc. And there was also the belief that, you know, the Maharaja should always captain the team. And that didn't happen on this tour. So the tour was financed by the Maharaja of Patiala, and his son captained the first unofficial test in Bombay. And for the test in Lahore, it was Wazir Ali. So I think they were trying to break down social and sort of religious barriers at the time in cricket. And I just think this tour was so progressive and really aided the breakdown of discrimination, I guess.
All right. When you talk to your great uncle, Mr. Tom Leather, about your research for the book, and what were the main elements of your discussion with him concerning that tour? I have
to correct you on something. I never spoke to him about the tour.
All right.
Okay. He died in 1991. All right. And what happened was I didn't even know he was on the tour.
Oh.
But the tour is not something that's kind of regarded in cricket history as being an important tour. Now, my feeling about it was it's the first time an Australian 11 came to the subcontinent, and I think that's a pretty significant foundation stone for what's grown into just an incredibly big industry now. So I actually never spoke to him about it, but I was working at the National Sports Museum, which is the sports museum at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and I was in charge of the cricket component of the museum. So it was the start-up phase, so I was working out what stories would be told, what artefacts we had to tell these stories, that kind of thing. It was a limited space. At that time, I was given an archive of material that had belonged to my great uncle. So it was like a time capsule. He had lent it to the club in the 80s, and they had never put it on display. Right. So suddenly I'm given this box of material, and it's like, you know, Aladdin's box. It was just so exciting finding this thing. And I really didn't know much. I mean, I knew the tour had happened, but I really didn't know much about his involvement in the tour. And with the archive of material, there's, as I said, there's lots of photographs, but there's also lots of inscriptions on photographs. There's signed balls. There's quite a bit of memorabilia pertaining to it. But because it wasn't a test tour, it was an unofficial test tour, it was never used by the Melbourne Cricket Club.
Why didn't you ever become a cricketer yourself?
Look, I don't think I'm built for cricket, but that's funny you say that because my sister, who's visiting with me this time, she's actually playing now.
All right.
Yeah, they're playing at Shalimar Gardens now. So.
All right, all right.
Oh, sorry, Shalimar Ground.
So how does it feel bringing cricket, I mean, writing about cricket, the history of cricketing relations between two countries, and then bringing players to another country and kind of combining two different teams to further that camaraderie that exists between two nations? How does it feel for you?
Oh, look, it was funny because it was the first time I actually toured, actually left from Australia with the team, and that was just fantastic on the plane. You know, we're all in our team jackets, and it was just wonderful. I sort of went back to 1935 when my great uncle was doing it. Of course, he was doing it on a boat, and it was taking him 4 weeks to get here, and circumstances were different, but some circumstances are the same.
All right.
Apart from I was a female, there were obviously no females back then.
Well, that has also changed a lot. I mean, we talk about inclusion of females and giving the same rights to women, but that is a global phenomenon. That's just not a European or an Asian phenomenon. That's a global phenomenon that's going on. It's very important for women to get the empowerment that they need to get the representation that they need in the society, whether it be in Australia or in Pakistan.
That's very important. It's very important indeed.
The articles that you've written for different newspapers over the years, a lot of them talk about racism, Megan. One of them talks about breaking down racial barriers. we talk about, of course, the Maharaja of Patiala's 1935 Australian cricketing tour of India, and you talk about racism then. And then you talk about managing expectations and policy responses to racism in sport. Has racism, in your point of view, increased over the decades, decreased, or has it remained stagnant? Or has it changed forms?
I think there are ebbs and flows, and I think there are different ways that racism manifests. And I mean, there's an awful lot of literature being written about the acrimonious relationship between Australia and India on the cricket pitch. There's an awful lot of material detailing that. But my feeling is for the first tour, there was no acrimony. There was goodwill. So I think, you know, Pakistan, Australia is slightly different matter.
All right. Megan, Sachin Tendulkar once said that as far as the World Cup is concerned, it's a process. We don't want to jump on the 50th floor right away. We must start on the ground floor. Is cricket, in your point of view, being a historian, a gradual process?
Of course it's a gradual process, absolutely. I mean, he's very correct in what he says, absolutely.
And when you were writing down or collecting material as far as the 1930s tour was concerned, and of course you must have researched other articles that came out later as well, what kind of changes, in your point of view, did you see in cricketing, apart from the different formats being changed, of course? What are the changes as far as discipline is concerned, as far as the gentlemanly conduct is concerned, from the Australian side that you feel?
Well, I mean, the biggest change in cricket has been the professionalisation of the game, which has happened slowly over a long period of time. So it's not that suddenly things became professional, because on this 35-36 tour, the players were paid incredibly handsomely to come, which wasn't happening with Test cricket. So at the same time that my cricketers were coming here, there was an official Test tour going to South Africa. And you know, there were lots of comments from players saying, I bet some of them wished they were on the boat to India rather than, you know, on the boat to South Africa, because they were being paid very handsomely to come. And you have to realise at the time it was following the Depression. So, you know, life was hard. And, you know, a lot of the key personnel of my team, I mean, I've researched them very closely, but they were all, you know, working in boot factories and finding it very hard to survive.
Sustenance was very important in those days because they were not getting paid as much. And now, I mean, a cricket player gets paid a very handsome amount of money, and he can sustain himself very easily, him and his family, if he's even a B-class cricket player in a country like Australia or even in Pakistan. He can sustain himself, but in those times it was very difficult. How did the people manage at that time?
Oh, it's funny, I've seen letters of leave. There was one fellow who played on my team who was a gardener, and there was a letter of leave from the St Kilda Botanic Gardens where he, you know, mowed lawns and, you know, pulled out weeds. And even my grandfather, who wasn't on this tour but obviously toured England a lot, he always had to be granted leave from where he was working at the time. And at time, you know, he worked for the bank at one stage, and the bank was kind of unsure whether they should allow him to go or not, which is kind of, I mean, it's crazy. He was breaking world records with Don Bradman in England in 1934, and the bank in Australia are going, oh, we don't know if we'll let you go. You know?
You've been close to your grandfather, Bill Ponsford. When you discussed cricket with him, what are the fond memories that he told you about that you still remember? Well,
he was always very reluctant to talk about bodyline. And whenever I speak to anyone, they always said, what did he say about bodyline? And I must say he kept a very closed lip to bodyline. But the friendships he formed, yeah, he talked very, very, very fondly about the Australian captain Bill Woodfull, who he was, you know, particularly close with. And we had, when I was a child, we had his scrapbook of photographs that my grandmother had put together, and I remember just kind of going through them and seeing him smoking a pipe in a, you know, vintage car or whatever, and sort of, you know, saying how glamorous I kind of thought it looked. And he agreed with me. I think it was, you know, obviously it's a any travel is a life-changing experience, but I think, you know, playing at such a high level and being so good at the game, is incredible.
That's true. Has cricket as a game, as a sport, become more glamorous over the decades, in your point of view?
Oh, absolutely. There were no wags on the tour when my great uncle and my grandmother went, or my great uncle and my grandfather went. So I definitely more glamorous. But I guess that's just social media. That's just, you know, the world becoming a smaller place.
When you talk about the world being a smaller place and the social media inclusion and how they also promote these players, do you feel also that that we never used to have in the 30s, of course, because you must have researched all of that. What used to help the players at that time as far as their promotion is concerned in the 1930s?
I've actually got a number of copies of promotional material to do with the 1935-36 tour, and the way the visiting players are talked up in the literature is incredible. So I'll just explain. This tour had a whole lot of older ex-Test players because the Australian Board of Control wouldn't allow any current Sheffield Shield or Test players to go. So they black banned current playing personnel. So it meant that there was a lot of retired players who came back. And again, we had Bert Ironmonger, who was 53,
he was
donning the pads, yeah. And we also had Ron Moresby, who was 20, who celebrated his 21st birthday in Lahore.
All right.
So apparently with the Bishop of Lahore, they went out for a big dinner with the Bishop of Lahore. So, so what I was getting back to was the way they were aging, they were players who had played very well but were aging, and there were young up-and-coming players who hadn't yet quite cracked it. So, of course, the publicity machine wanted this team to be seen as a competitive, glamorous kind of outfit. And I just laugh at how, like, my great uncle was described as a cyclone of bowling, which I thought was a very glamorous kind of term. So there was publicity. I guess it just wasn't press. And actually, I have found some footage. There's only, as far as my research has found, there's only one bit of surviving footage from the tour, and that was the Test match in Bombay. And I just can't believe, looking at that, it only goes for, 30 seconds or something, unfortunately.
At least it's there.
Yeah, it's there, but just the crowds, it's just incredible. Like they had crowds of 30,000, 50,000 coming to the matches. They had crowds of 5,000 coming to training.
I mean, the crowds, speaking of the crowds and their interest in sporting events such as that of cricket, has been phenomenal from the 1930s to date. I mean, even now we have the PSL, the Pakistan Super League. The third edition is going on, and now the final will be held in Karachi, and also there's match being held in Lahore. And the crowds are just going berserk with all the players coming from the world over and being part of this franchise. Yeah,
but I think that's really interesting because people always considered that to be a post-colonial phenomenon. Yet my feeling was that the crowds were just as crazy back in the colonial times. And really, it wasn't the English coming to the grounds, it was the locals. Because the Australians were sort of rather snubbed by the English when they came here.
Well, that was evident because it was a former British colony anyways. So that was anticipated, let's put it that way. But when you talked to your grandfather as well, in the beginning of the show, you said he was kind of not pleased with how the format of the game has changed from a 5-day to a 1-day, and now we have T20s, we've got other formats of the games as well, and T10s as well. Do you feel that, in your point of view as a historian of the sport, and also if I would ask your grandfather's point of view, do you feel that cricket should have diversified as much as it has in the different formats?
For the survival of the game, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm a bit nostalgic about the past as well, but I do think it's being, fiscally responsible to survive, that it has to do that. And really, there's a lot of competing sports all vying for the position of the national game. And I think that, the games have to evolve, things have to change, things can't stay the same.
That's true. I read somewhere once that champions never sleep, the eternal spirit keeps them alert and awake. When you talked to your grandfather, when you researched for your thesis, for your book as well, the pictures that you took out, and now your second book that is about to be published as well, did you find the same spirit in the players in the 1930s that you find now in the sporting arena?
Absolutely. I don't think that the passion for playing the sport has changed. I really don't. Like, I think, I mean, possibly now it's driven by, you know, hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars, you know. So I don't, but I think people can only play if they love the game. So despite, you know, how much money's being thrown at them, you have to love cricket. You have to have gone through those years and years and years of backyard cricket, you know, training, camps, whatever, you know. And really, it comes, you know, because actually on the tour that we're on now, there's a young boy who's come from Australia, who's got Pakistani parents but lives in Australia. He's touring with his father.
But that happens a lot in different teams as well. We've got Pakistani origin players that are playing for different teams internationally as well.
So this young boy's 15. And it's just been so refreshing to have him on the tour. I mean, he's so enthusiastic about the game, and we've got a couple of players on our team who haven't played much, and he's just giving them tips about how to hold the bat, and you know, it's been wonderful. So again, I kind of feel it's a little bit similar to the 35-36 team, because we've got a 16-year-old and we've got 60-year-olds on our team. So it's a disparate group of people all touring because they're connected by the love of cricket.
All right. Speaking of the love for cricket and speaking of Australia, Jeffrey Boycott said something that was a little bit controversial as far as cricketing in Australia is concerned. He said that the Aussies have spent so much time basking in the glory of the last generation that they have forgotten to plan for this one. It's just like the West Indies. He said that once their great names from the 70s and 80s retired, the whole thing fell apart. He also says that the way things are going, the next Ashes series cannot come too quickly for England. What a shame that we have to wait until, this quote came a little bit back, we have to wait until 2013 to play this slot again. What do you feel about the Australian players as well? Do you feel that they've lost their charm over the decades?
Again, as I'm saying, I think the game has to evolve, the coaching techniques have to change. And I think that is happening, and I think all countries go through ebbs and flows. And I don't think it's the, you know, end of Australia being great at cricket. I really don't. I mean, I think every team, every country, every national team has their challenges.
All right, that's your point of view. Technically, cricketing as a sport has evolved a lot. There's a lot of minute details that now come up on the screens that we could not see in the times, in the decades beforehand. Little inches by inch detail of how the ball went, where it went down, can lead to a player being out or not out. You can, of course, judge. There are different techniques to find that out. Now, it has become evolved, let's put it that way, technically. Do you feel that helps the game a lot, and that helps our sportsmen get better at what they're doing?
Well, again, the rules and the techniques and the technology has always evolved. It's like, I'll give you two examples. My grandfather was colourblind.
All right.
Okay, so blue, couldn't see the difference between red and green. So you kind of go, how did he play cricket? He's hitting a red ball against green grass. And it was just that sight boards had just been introduced. And if he was 10 years older, he wouldn't have been successful because they didn't have the sight boards. The LBW rule had just been introduced before the 1935-36 tour, and it caused an awful lot of controversy, and the battle between whether it should be a rule or not was fought out for a very, very, very long time. So when my team of cricketers came to the subcontinent, the LBW law was used in some games but not all, and it definitely wasn't used in the South African tour, the South African Test tour, Australian tour to South Africa at the same time. Right. So again, you know, it was being played in some countries but not other countries. So it's always been, things have always changed. So I think recent changes are probably more, we probably know more about recent changes, but it's always changed.
Shane once said something very interesting that I'm going to quote. He said
lots of interesting things.
Yes, but I'm going to quote a less controversial thing. He said to me, cricket is a simple game. And he adds that keep it simple and just go and play.
Yes.
Do you feel that has also kind of changed for the worse? Because with all the technicalities, with all the complexities that have been attached to the game, that the game is no longer a simple one.
Did you ask him that question?
No, I'm going to ask you that question, being a historian.
I don't know. I'm going to pass, as Shane Warne probably passed on that question as well.
Do you agree or do you disagree? At least you can.
No, look, I would like to think that he's correct. I idealistically like to think it's a simple game.
One should keep the game as simple as possible so that you enjoy the game, you go in the game and you just play
and
come back.
he absolutely loved the game.
That is so true. Coming to your career as a photographer, Megan, when did it all begin? When did your love for photography begin?
I mean, as a child, I always had a camera. I finished secondary school and I went to the Victorian College of the Arts to do an arts degree majoring in photography. At that time, I wasn't documenting sport at all, actually. And I did, so post my degree, I was a freelance photographer. I've photographed music bands, I photographed events, I photographed the comedy festival, I photographed portraiture, I did a lot of work for a number of the local newspapers. Then I found out that the Melbourne Cricket Ground was being redeveloped.
All right.
So that was 2002. So I went out with my camera pretty much multiple times every week, and I had a beautiful big old Pentax 6.7, so a medium format camera. And at the time, people were using, most people were using digital cameras, and I know I want to carry this big old beautiful thing. So I spent a year documenting the ground. So it went through the cricket season, through the football season, and I got lined up a publisher to publish that book. And it was all because the total, 3/4 of the ground was being redeveloped.
All right.
So, and I wanted again to have some record of the past.
All right. Speaking of record of the past, you wrote an article way back in 2003 called Pictures for the Faithful. That was based on the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and you said you met a friend at that time after a very long time, and you started to talk about Adam Gilchrist, and you also talked about the history of the Melbourne Cricket Ground, that it has been where Sir Donald Bradman scored 19 first-class centuries, where and Carey kicked 400 goals, where Betty Kubert won 3 gold medals, and so many other celebrities as far as the sporting arena have participated in that very ground. That ground holds a very memorable spot for so many people and so many sporting enthusiasts, not just cricket. When you were researching all of that, how proud did you feel of the place such as the MCG?
Well, I felt very, very proud, especially when they emblazoned my grandfather's name across one of the stands. So, and I felt incredibly proud. And it's not just a sporting ground. Also, I guess it's a cultural institution that's housed, religious rallies. It's housed rock bands. And I really think, I think my whole interest in sports history is that it reflects, social history. And I think that MCG's role in Melbourne reflects what's happened around Melbourne. Like, it really reflects.
That's a very interesting point. Sports history and social history and their interamalgamation. How important was that? How normal was that for Melbourne, for Australia, or for any other country in your point of view when you were researching that?
I think it hasn't changed. I think it's, when I'll talk about Melbourne specifically, the MCG being the centre of the city and the hub of the city, and they have 100,000 members of the Melbourne Cricket Club. Visitation is incredible, and there's more people going to the Melbourne Cricket Ground than there are to the National Museum in Melbourne.
All right.
And again, they've been particularly good at promoting it as a tourist, draw card, I guess. But again, I think it's important because it is so central to the city and so part of the fabric of the city that, that's something I don't think has changed.
All right. Speaking of something that has not changed is the more than 400 runs twice that your grandfather Will Ponsford at the MCG also scored. It's like you quoted the cricket equivalent of scaling the Everest and the K2.
Did I say that?
So, I mean, that must have been so important and so out of the ordinary. I mean, scoring more than 400 runs. I mean, even nowadays, scoring more than 400 runs is not an everyday task, even by the greatest of players.
Yes, yes.
So, when people talk about your grandfather now, when they reminisce, whether it be from the new lot or whether from the old lot, what is the most common factor that you find that they talk about your grandfather?
Look, I mean, it's definitely the world records. It's definitely the partnership with Sir Donald Bradman in England in 1934. It's definitely, unfortunately, it's definitely Bodyline because he was part of that whole tour. And again, people now know it from. Young people now know his name through the MCG.
Of course, you write very proudly about the Ponsford stand as well. They changed the position of the Ponsford stand at one time, and you were a bit apprehensive on where they would put it, and you were very happy when it was
We were
funny.
actually apprehensive about whether they'd actually continue using the name. Some stage it would become the Shane Warne stand. But
you see, Bill Ponsford is a name that people in Australia talk about, that people all around the world talk about, because that was a time when people did not score that much around the world. So that name is kind of encrusted everywhere in sporting history, in cricketing history. When you come to Pakistan and you interact with the Pakistanis, because Pakistanis have a great love for the cricket, they idolize. I remember friends of mine who used to pray while Pakistan was playing against India or against any other team. They used to constantly pray so that Pakistan wins the match.
was it successful?
Yes.
Were there
well, sometimes there was, and they used to cry when Pakistan wasn't, and they used to laugh and distribute sweets when Pakistan was. Has the same feeling of joy, enthusiasm retained in the Australian public?
Oh yes, absolutely. But can I just, on that note, can I tell you about the first victory of the local team in 1935-36?
Let's go back in history.
Yeah, let's go back in history. So the local teams had never won against a visiting team. So they'd never won against the English. And the first victory on this tour and on any tour was at Lahore.
All right.
And I've read so many players, the players' manuscripts or letters home or whatever, talking about the victory and how excited the locals were. And they're talking about Lawrence Gardens, which we're playing at in a couple of days' time, and how they were worried that the old stand would fall down. And of course, I went to the old stand or the old ground, and nothing's changed. I'm sure it's exactly the same, but all the players are writing, oh, we were so fearful because everyone was, so excited by victory that the stand wouldn't remain upright.
All right, tell us a little bit about your new book that is about to be published.
Yes, my new book is the trade version of my thesis. So it's the same story about the 1935-36 tour, just minus methodology, minus any theory. Because this was such a interesting story, interesting cultural story, not just a sporting story, a cultural story. And they had so many adventures on tour, and they, rode elephants. And it was culturally so confronting, racially and culturally so confronting for this team. And it's just something that no one has researched. So, hopefully my book will be out later in the year with a lot of my photographs that I have from the tour. So, as
far as your photography is concerned, do you also take out exhibitions in Australia?
Actually, what I did was when I did my book on my Pentax 6.7 camera, I actually put the camera down and I thought, I'll pick it up at some stage, and now it's just my phone. So,
because it's easier to carry, you see. You can easily take pictures
but
wherever you want.
I really understand photography. I really understand composition. I understand light, and it really, really, really interests me. And
What is the most important factor as far as photography is concerned, in your point of view? What is the most essential part of being a good photographer?
Lights.
Lights. All
light.
right.
No, understanding light. And so many photographers, or not photographers, so many people just snap, 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 and you will get a good shot. But I also think it's knowing what's a good shot as well. So it's the whole sort of selection process. And that's why it was so interesting with the thesis, because I was, using visual theory and photographic theory, which I hadn't even thought about for a very long time. But it was so good to be able to apply that to these tourist snaps in 1935.
Speaking of 1935, in your different articles that you've written about, in your book that you've also written about this famous tour to India, you talk about the Maharaja of Patiala's generosity. Now, the generosity is emphasized a lot. That makes the heading of all the articles that you talk about that tour. Is generosity very important for any country's cricketing team to visit another country, even in this day and time?
Well, I mean, the Maharaja of Patiala completely financed the whole tour. So he paid the players generously. He paid for all their transportation costs, their food costs, so that the tour would not have happened without his generosity.
All right.
Now, of course, there's bodies like cricket bodies around the world who but I guess there are private sponsors as well,
exactly.
who put a whole lot of money into.
The sponsors never used to be there at that time.
No.
Because the money was very important for players to come to play as well. And you said that the players were from mostly lower middle class backgrounds, so it was also very important for them to have a certain amount of money for their livelihood when they were playing.
Yes, and again, when I was talking about them having to take leave from work, there was the worry about what they were going to do when they went back, because you can't just give up your job, just after the Depression and sort of think.
True.
Yeah.
True. Megan, how important is sports, and let's talk specifically about cricket, in bridging gaps between countries, because we love cricket in Pakistan. We are crazy about cricket. So are people in Australia, so are people in England, so are people in South Africa, in India, where of course the relations aren't the same since some time. Do you feel that good sporting ties bridge the gaps between countries and bring them closer?
Oh, absolutely. And even all, smaller countries like Fiji and countries like that, where that's one of the, not the ICC member nations, but it's an affiliate member, and the enthusiasm for sport in those smaller countries is just incredible. And so I think it's so important.
And also, we talked about racism, you talked about racism as well in those times, in the 1930s, and even now there exists some kind of racism, some kind of differences in class. Do you feel that exists when players play against each other in the same country? For example, in Australia there are different other teams as well. We've got local teams as well. You have brought your team from Australia of amateurs here that are playing against. Do you feel that certain animosity, that competitiveness is very good, but as far as animosity is concerned or racism is concerned, do you feel that feeling is still prevalent?
My point of view is that the society is more sophisticated now. People at Cricket Australia educate their boys and girls on expectations and of how they should behave. And so I think whereas back in the 30s there was no training, yet now there's an awful lot of infrastructure and finances put into educating these players. So
you've got scholarships, sports scholarships that you never used to have in those days.
Yes, yeah. And even with our Indigenous community in Australia, there are initiatives to try to involve the Aboriginal people to come and play.
All right. So that also bridges the gap between different sects, between different societies, even in your country, that is Australia, your continent, that is Australia.
Yes,
because it's no longer.
And again, because we have a multicultural society now, whereas back in the 30s, I actually looked at census records and looked at how many people of various different religions there were. And really, most people are Anglo-Saxon Christians, in Australia at the time. So I was doing all this research to try to work out what the Australians knew of the subcontinent before they left. And so I went through archives of newspapers, and unfortunately, what was mainly reported on was, animosity between, the communal groups and between the English. So I think that they left being very naive about what they were going to experience. And I think for them, their 4.5 months away was an incredibly culturally confronting time and a time of massive changing of beliefs.
All right. From that time of massive changing of beliefs to now, where every country, every society has become multicultural, multi-ethnic. Even in Pakistan, you've got different ethnicities, different religions. In Australia, you've got people from Pakistan, you've got people from other countries that go and live and work and study and play the sport there.
And improve the diet too, and improve the cuisine, I must say.
Yes, that's true as well. Spice up your lives as well in Australia.
Yes.
So, do you feel that also helps in people understanding each other? When a society becomes multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-religious?
I used to work on a research project that was funded by the AFL, which is the Australian Football League. And that was looking at multiculturalism and, I guess, multicultural acceptance in football as opposed to other sporting codes. And football's been quite progressive, and they very early on they put rules in place where there's no racial sledging, like none of that is tolerated on the field. And cricket's the same. You can't sledge on a ground of multicultural, on a multicultural basis on the ground.
All right. Speaking of multicultural, let's come to Pakistan and your second trip to Pakistan. This is the second time you're here. It's a more extensive, maybe, period of time for you that you're here this time, and we managed to get you on board for this interview as well. What do you like about Pakistan?
Oh, I love Pakistan. I love everything about Pakistan almost. I mean, the food's fantastic. The people are the nicest people I've met anywhere around the world. Like seriously, people are so welcoming. I've got my handbag stuffed full of business cards and whatnot. From a research perspective, it's been so enlightening. I'm guessing it's people welcome sort of foreigners coming in because there probably haven't been that many foreign visitors visiting for a while. But I'm incredibly fond of it here.
Being a woman, do you ever feel out of place in a country like Pakistan, that you're being looked upon too much? Because that is a perception that people in the West have a lot about Pakistan. Oh, we're not safe, we can't roam around freely in a country like Pakistan, we can't go to the north of Pakistan, we can't go without being with other people of our country here because we feel afraid of being in a country like Pakistan. Did you ever encounter that?
Look, before I came here, there was that slight, look, should I come? I don't know. And for the first time I was invited by the Australian High Commission, Australian Federal Police, and that was to attend the Fazzo Sambul Cup, which is the charity that we've been raising money for. And I guess there was that slight, and I thought, no, I have to do this. And I've just encouraged all my friends back in Australia to come and visit. I've not once felt unsafe here, and people are just being so obliging and so helpful, and I'm putting on weight, but that's okay, I guess.
All right, finally, Megan, what do you foresee as far as your upcoming tours of Pakistan is concerned? What are you planning to do with the future?
I would like to get more adventuresome every time I come and see more. I really, I would like to get into some of the communities rather than just staying in the cities.
And also photograph them as well.
And photograph them, exactly. And I've started following people on Instagram and things, and the visual aspects of this country are just incredible.
How about also maybe chronicling some of the history of Pakistan's cricket as well
Well,
in the beginning of the years.
I would absolutely love to do that. I think next time I won't be playing cricket, I'll be in the libraries, looking through archives.
That would be great, because we will have an Australian sports historian writing about Pakistani sports and its history, because we've had great players as far as Pakistan is concerned as well. And it's only good to know internationally about those players, because a lot of our generation also does not know about those players, and abroad their image that they have of Pakistan needs to change, needs to become positive, because we are positive. We are,
Yes.
we love people, we love the company, and we are very generous and friendly towards people, whether it be from our culture, from other cultures, and that is something that needs to be radiated outside. And
Of course
it's only
it does. Of
people
course it
through
does.
you that this will go on, because people's mentalities, people's perceptions only change through what they see, what they read, and this only will come through people and historians like you. We'll talk about the past, the future, the present, and the relations, and I hope you will be one of those ambassadors who will continue to bridge the gap between the past and the present, and Australia and Pakistan. Thank you very much, Megan,
thank
to
you.
have given us the time, to have given us this unique opportunity of talking to a sports historian and to a granddaughter of a legendary Australian cricketer, and also the great, how should I say, great grandniece, or grandniece of one of the players who played in the 1930s tour.
I think I'm the great niece.
Great niece, all right. I don't know how this.
Yeah. Yes. I think I'm the great niece. Okay. Should we leave it at that? I'm the great niece.
All right. Well, thank you again. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll end with this little quote by Ian Botham. He said, "To me, it doesn't matter how good you are. Sports is all about playing and competing. Whatever you do, wherever you play, enjoy it as much as you can, and always try to win." We try to win through winning in games, and we try to win by winning people's hearts. It's very important for cricketing ties to continue between countries, and for people like Megan to continue coming to Pakistan and spreading the love here, and then taking that love back to Australia and showing the people how loving, generous and friendly we are as Pakistanis. Omer Khalid bids you farewell from this episode of Diplomatic Enclave. We'll be back inshallah next week, same time, same channel. Take care of yourselves. Allah Hafiz, and thank you so very much, Megan.